ran across this piece of truth just the other day. St. Francis de Sales observed that you learn to speak by speaking. You learn to study by studying. You learn to run by running. You learn to work by working. And just so, you learn to love by loving, by engaging yourself in the sacred art of loving. How's that look? What is the model? How do I know when I'm loving? How do we begin to experience more real moments in loving? What is the key to that? Well, you begin. Your best shot at it. You just put it out there. No putting it off until your next vacation or Saturday night and until you finish this chapter of the book you're reading. Now is the time. No waiting until it feels right or until you think you'll be better at it. It will never feel right until you do it, and you won't get better at all until you start, till you begin. Take the plunge. Loving well is a skill. It's just like playing an instrument or operating a computer. How many of you remember the first time you looked at that screen and the keyboard and all the little apps that showed up? Did you have an overwhelming sense of competence at that moment? I don't know about you, but I still don't have a clue. Yeah. But you keep working at it. You keep applying your willingness. Just like playing an instrument or operating a computer or cooking. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Creating real moments, authentic moments of intimacy takes practice. You could listen to every tape anybody has ever recorded on the fine art of loving, or attend every seminar on relationship that's available, but you still wouldn't be any good at loving. Loving is the only way to get good at loving. Read something by Barbara DeAngelis the other day called Real Moments. She talked about her marriage to a well-known magician. He was a master at creating exquisite illusions on stage, she wrote, and doing miraculous sleight of hand with coins and cards. Whenever anyone would ask him how he made his magic look so effortless, he would explain that he'd spent years practicing, and he'd share his favorite saying with them at that point. The difficult must become habit, and the habit easy, and the easy beautiful. The difficult must become habit, the habit easy, and the easy beautiful. She writes, it's been over 15 years since I've heard that phrase. But as I write today, I haven't been able to get it out of my mind. It is difficult to love well, but the more we work on it, loving becomes a habit. You no longer have to remind yourself to tell your partner how much you appreciate him or her. You just find yourself doing it. He doesn't have to be asked to share his feelings. He volunteers them on his own. Suddenly it feels more natural for you both to love, to give, to open up than it does to not love and to hold back. And the more you give, the easier it gets until there's no more effort involved. Finally, what becomes easy begins to deepen as you and your beloved step out of the way and allow love to simply flow through each of you to the other. Your love has become beautiful. How does that feel? Just to talk about it, just to sense it, just to draw a mind picture of it. Love is a choice you make from moment to moment. You choose to love by remembering to not let a meeting go by without expressing one of what they call the 3 A's of an authentic loving expression: attention, affection. How about when's the last time you blessed your lover with a little attention or affection or appreciation? The 3 A's of the loving communication: attention, affection, appreciation. How does that feel? How does that look in practice? Consider this. He was in the 3rd grade. Class taught at St. Mary's School in Morris, Minnesota. All 34 of this nuns, students, were dear to me, but Mark Eklund was 1 in a million. Very neat in appearance, but had that happy to be alive attitude that made even his occasional mischievousness delightful. Ever meet anybody like that? Just, you couldn't help but love him. Sometimes you really wanted to, somehow you couldn't help but love him. Mark talked incessantly. I had to remind him again and again that talking without permission was not acceptable. What impressed me so much, though, was his sincere response. Every time I had to correct him for misbehaving, he'd say, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." I didn't know what to make of it at first, but before long I became accustomed to hearing it many times a day. One morning my patience was growing thin when Mark talked once too often, and then I made a novice teacher's mistake. I looked at him and said, "If you say one more word, I'm going to tape your mouth shut." It wasn't 10 seconds later when Chuck blurted out, "Mark is talking again." I hadn't asked any of the students to help me watch Mark, but since I had stated the punishment in front of the class, I had to act on it. I remember the scene as if it had occurred this morning. I walked to my desk very deliberately, opened my drawer, and took out a roll of masking tape. Without saying a word, I proceeded to Mark's desk, tore off 2 pieces of tape, and made a big X with them over his mouth. I then returned to the front of the room. As I glanced at Mark to see how he was doing, he winked at me. That did it. I started laughing. The class cheered as I walked back to Mark's desk, removed the tape, and shrugged my shoulders. His first words were, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." At the end of the year, I was asked to teach junior high math. The years flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was in my classroom again. He was more handsome than ever and just as polite. Since he had to listen carefully to my instructions in the new math, he did not talk so much in 9th grade as he had in the 3rd. One Friday, things just didn't feel right. He had worked hard on a new concept all week, and I sensed that the students were frowning, frustrated with themselves, and edgy with one another. I had to stop this crankiness before it got out of hand. So I asked them to list the names of the other students in the room on 2 sheets of paper, leaving a space between each name. Then I told them to think of the nicest thing they could say about each of their classmates and write it down. It took the remainder of the class period to finish the assignment, and as the students left the room, each one handed me the papers. Charlie smiled. Mark said, "Thank you for teaching me, sister. Have a good weekend." That Saturday, I wrote down the names of each student on a separate sheet of paper. Then I listed what everyone else had said about that individual. On Monday, I gave each student his or her list. Before long, the entire class was smiling. "Really?" I heard whispered. I never knew that meant anything to anyone. I didn't know others liked me so much. No one ever mentioned these papers in class again. I never knew if they discussed them after class or with their parents, but it didn't matter. The exercise had accomplished its purpose. The students were happy with themselves and one another again. And that group of students moved on. Several years later, after I returned from vacation, my parents met me at the airport. As we were driving home, Mother asked me the usual questions about the trip, the weather, my experience in general. And there was a light lull in the conversation. Mother gave Dad a sideways glance and simply says, "Dad?" My father cleared his throat, as he usually did before something important. "The Eklunds called last night," he began. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them in years. I wonder how Mark is." Dad responded quietly. "Mark was killed in Vietnam," he said. The funeral is tomorrow, and his parents would like it if you could attend. To this day, I can still point to the exact spot on I-494 where Dad told me about Mark. I had never seen a serviceman in a military coffin before. Mark looked so handsome, so mature. All I could think at that moment was, "Mark, I would give all the masking tape in the world if only you would talk to me." The church was packed with Mark's friends. Chuck's sister sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Why did it have to rain on the day of the funeral? It was difficult enough at the graveside. The pastor said the usual prayers and the bugler played taps, and one by one those who loved Mark took a last walk by the coffin and sprinkled it with holy water. I was the last one to bless the coffin. As I stood there, one of the soldiers who had acted as pallbearer came up to me. "Were you Mark's math teacher?" he asked. I nodded as I continued to stare at the coffin. "Mark talked about you a lot," he said. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to Chuck's farmhouse for lunch. Mark's mother and father were there, obviously waiting for me. "We want to show you something," his father said, taking a wallet out of his pocket. "They found this on Mark when he was killed. We thought you might recognize it." Opening the billfold, he carefully removed 2 worn pieces of notebook paper that had obviously been taped, folded, and refolded many times. I knew without looking that the papers were the ones on which I had listed all the good things each of Mark's classmates had said about him. "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother said. "As you can see, Mark treasured it." Mark's classmates started to gather around us. Mark smiled rather sheepishly and said, "I still have my list. It's in the top drawer of my desk at home." Chuck's wife said, "Chuck asked me to put this in your wedding album." "I have mine too," Marilyn said. "This is in my diary." Then Vicky, another classmate, reached into her pocketbook, took out her wallet, and showed her worn and frazzled list to the group. "I carry this with me at all times," Vicky said without batting an eyelash. "I think we all saved our lists." That's when I finally sat down and cried. I cried for Mark, for all his friends who would never see him again. In the end, written by Sister Helen P. Moshe. And the purpose of this letter is to encourage anyone and everyone to compliment the people you love and care about. We often tend to forget the importance of showing our affection and love and appreciation. Sometimes the smallest of things could mean the most to another. I am asking you to please send this letter around and spread the message and encouragement to express your love and caring by complimenting and being open with communication. The density of people in society is so thick that we forget that life will end one day. And we don't know when that one day will be. So please, I beg of you, tell the people you love and care for that they are special and important. Tell them before it's too late. And yes, I do love you. You. Do any of you have your little notes? Things like that you've hung on to for years? I have one I've hung on to for a good long time. Going on 10 years now. This was shared with me by a gal named Jerry Sudham. Hi, Chad. After all these years, you may not remember me. Jerry Marsh was my maiden name before I married in 1982. And I was part of Gentle Spaces when you guys, and she's talking about Light and I, when you guys were here until you and Light left. I've attached a picture, 20 years older, but hopefully I haven't changed so much that you don't remember me. I want to share something with you about how important you and Light were and still are in my life. I have been searching spiritually for the last few years. Honestly, I've never found any spiritually home as fulfilling and reflect and perfect as when you and Light were here. However, I've continued to search, and one day recently I was meditating on my search, and a tiny voice said, "Your guru doesn't have to be local. Get in touch with Chad, listen to his services online, and the CDs mailed to you." I immediately felt so relieved and excited. I went on the website and got on the mailing list for CDs and have been reading some of your articles, and I feel like I've returned home. I never forget you saying that once a person is on the path, they may take detours, but they will never be totally off it. And I found that to be true. It was so cool to read about how your church is, your new church, and how amazing it is to learn you have grown children and grandchildren. My own daughter is 21 and a junior at UT Knoxville. I just felt guided to send you a note about how you and Light touched my life when you were here in Nashville and continue to touch it 20 plus years from North Carolina. Loving thoughts, Jen. Wow. It took her how long to, maybe 5 minutes. But that's got a special place in my life. Yeah. Each one of us is born with the capacity to create that. And that's one of the 3 A's. It's why love is an art form. It's an art form that includes attention, affection, and appreciation, and a regular giving out of those qualities. So I invite each one of you to take a kind of little inventory of those folks in your life and try that. Don't try it, do it. And know that you're well loved in this heart. I appreciate you. I adore you. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.